Welcome to True Crime Cases today, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature to uncover the truth behind some of the most shocking crimes today. We're taking you to Shaker Heights, a quiet upper-middle-class suburb in Ohio, but beneath the surface of this idyllic community, a sinister plan was brewing, one that would end in murder. This is the story of how a husband's twisted obsession led him to poison his wife. Also, he could marry her daughter. Aria Elliott was a 46-year-old woman with big dreams and a loving family in Shaker Heights, Ohio. She was well known in the community for her friendly nature and warm smile. Aria was the kind of person who always stopped to chat with neighbors and was happy to help whenever needed. She was active in the local community, often participating in church events and organizing neighborhood barbecues. Aria's friendly nature made her well-liked by everyone who knew her. Aria lived in a charming two-story home on a tree-lined street in Shaker Heights, a suburb of Cleveland known for its beautiful architecture and strong sense of community. Shaker Heights is often described as having a boho chic vibe, with its famous liberal politics, a mix of old and new homes, local coffee shops, and a vibrant art scene. Aria's home was filled with family photos, cozy furniture, and a kitchen that always smelled of freshly baked cookies. Aria loved cooking and was known for her famous chocolate chip cookies, which she often brought to work or shared with neighbors. Aria was married to Lorenzo Elliott, a man 16 years her junior despite the age difference. Aria and Lorenzo appeared to be a happy couple. Lorenzo worked for a health insurance company and was often busy with work, but the couple made time for each other. They had been married for 5 years and lived with Camila Elliott, Aria's 19-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Camila was a bright and ambitious college student with dreams of becoming a doctor. Aria was proud of her daughter and supported her in every way she could. In the weeks leading up to her death, Aria was planning a family vacation to Orlando. She was excited about the trip and talked about it constantly. She had recently purchased a new suitcase and was filling it with summer clothes, sunscreen, and a new pair of sandals. Aria loved spending time with her family and couldn't wait for the vacation. But her excitement would be cut short forever when on the morning of April 18, 2020, she was found dead in her home that morning. Shaker Heights was just waking up. It was a cool, overcast day. Typical of spring in Ohio, the neighborhood was quiet, with only a few early risers walking their dogs or grabbing their morning coffee from Starbucks. Aria Elliott had always been an early bird, but that day, something was wrong. At around 8:40 a.m., Camila Levinsky Elliott, Aria's 20-year-old daughter, went down to the kitchen and found her mother lying on the floor. Unresponsive beside her was a can of Aria's favorite drink, and also a favorite in America, Diet Pepsi, spilled on the floor. The sugary liquid slowly seeped into the grove between the tiles. Panicked, Camila screamed and immediately called 911, her hands shaking as she dialed. The operator's voice tried to calm her down, but Camila was too overwhelmed. She was crying and begging for someone to come quickly. When the paramedics arrived just minutes later, they found Camila in shock, pacing back and forth in the living room. The house was eerily quiet except for the sound of the 911 call still echoing from Camila's phone on the kitchen counter. The paramedics rushed to Aria's side, but it was too late. Aria was declared dead at the scene. Camila couldn't believe what was happening. Just the day before, her mother had been excitedly talking about their upcoming vacation, picking out outfits and making plans. Now she was gone, and Camila was left feeling lost and refused as the paramedics worked. Camila called her stepfather, Lorenzo Elliott, who was at work at the time. Lorenzo's reaction was hysterical. He began wailing, almost screaming, as Camila sobbed into the phone. He told her he would leave work right away, but he sounded almost insane. With grief, the Shaker Heights Police Department quickly responded to the scene at the Elliott residence. Detective Laura Robitek, who had been with the department for over 17 years, led the investigation. Robitek was known for her sharp eye and methodical approach. She had a reputation for solving even the most challenging cases. When she arrived at the scene on the morning of March 17, 2019, she immediately sensed something was off. The Elliott home was a typical well-kept suburban house with a neat lawn and a garden that was beginning to bloom. With the first signs of spring inside, the house was clean and organized. The only sign that something was out of the ordinary was Aria M.C. Millen's lifeless body on the kitchen floor next to her. was a can of Diet Pepsi, America's nostalgic favorite drink, spilled around her. Detective Rudich and her team began their work by securing the crime scene. They quickly put up yellow tape around the perimeter of the house and stationed officers at the entrance to keep onlookers and neighbors at a distance. The investigators carefully examined the kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing seemed out of place. Arya's purse was on the counter untouched and the back door was locked. From the inside, the team noticed that the Diet Pepsi can was still relatively full with only a small amount spilled. On the floor, this caught Robotech's attention, and she instructed the crime scene unit to collect the can as evidence along with the remaining liquid. The team also took samples from the kitchen counter and floor to test for any unusual substances. They photographed the scene from every angle, documenting every detail. An autopsy was ordered, determined the exact cause of Arya's death. The paramedics on the scene had suspected a heart attack, but Robotech wasn't so sure. There was something about the way Arya was positioned, and the fact that she had been drinking her favorite soda, or pop as it's called in the Midwest, just moments before that, made Detective Robotech suspicious. As the investigation continued, the detectives combed through the house form or clues. They searched Arya's personal belongings, looking for anything that might suggest foul play. Her phone was also taken as evidence with the intention of checking her recent calls and messages. Detective Robotech knew this case would require careful examination. There was much more to Arya's death than met the eye. With Arya Elliott's death under investigation, the police turned their attention to those closest to her. The first person they questioned was her husband, Lorenzo Elliott. Lorenzo Elliott, 33 years old, was much younger than Arya. He worked for a health insurance company in Cleveland and had a reputation for being handsome, charming, and successful. He seemed to have it all: a stable job, a nice home, and a wonderful family. But as the detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a different side of Lorenzo. Lorenzo had met Arya 7 years earlier when he was working as a junior analyst at the insurance company. Arya, a widow at the time, had been charmed by his youthful energy and confidence. They married a year later, and Lorenzo became a stepfather to Camila, who was then 13 on the surface. Their marriage seemed solid, but friends noticed that Lorenzo had become more distant from Arya. In the past year, he spent longer hours at work, often coming home late or claiming he had to travel for business. During his first interview with the police, Lorenzo appeared calm, even cold. He expressed shock over Arya's death, but his emotions seemed muted. He told Detective Laura Robots that he had been at work when it happened and had rushed home. As soon as Camila called him when asked about his relationship with Arya, Lorenzo claimed that they had a good marriage, though he admitted they had grown apart over time. He insisted that he had nothing to do with her death and had no idea why anyone would want to harm her. However, as the interview continued, Detective Robotech's suspicions grew. Lorenzo was too composed, too controlled when asked about Arya's plans. Lorenzo was vague, saying he was a feminist and didn't like to keep track of his wife's day-to-day activities. He also couldn't recall the last time they had a meaningful conversation or had sex together as a couple. Robotech found it odd that Lorenzo, who claimed to love his wife, seemed so disconnected from her life. The detectives also noticed inconsistencies in Lorenzo's statements. For example, he mentioned that he knew Arya's favorite drink was Diet Pepsi, but he couldn't explain why there was a half-empty K next to her body when she was found. He claimed Arya drank soda often but didn't seem to know much about her other habits or routines. As the police continued to question Lorenzo, they began to consider his potential motive. Could Lorenzo have wanted out of the marriage? Or was there something else, something darker driving him? The investigation into Lorenzo's life revealed that he had been keeping secrets. One of the most shocking was his sexual obsession with his stepdaughter, Camila. This revelation gave the police a new angle to pursue. If Lorenzo was in love with Camila, it could explain why he might want Arya out of the way. But proving that Lorenzo was involved in Arya's death would require much more evidence. Detective Robotech knew they had to be thorough, carefully piecing together the puzzle that was starting to form. The next person the police investigated was Camila Levinsky, Elliot Arya's 21-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Camila was a bright and determined young woman well on her way to becoming a doctor. She was a pre-med student at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, where she had earned A scholarship for her academic excellence, Camila was known for her kindness and dedication to her studies, often volunteering at local hospitals and tutoring underprivileged students. Camila had always admired her mother, seeing Arya as a role model of strength and compassion. The two were incredibly close, often spending weekends shopping, watching movies, or just talking about life while cuddled up in bed. Arya had been Camila's biggest support, especially after the death of Camila's biological father when she was just a child. That loss had forged an incredibly strong bond between mother and daughter, making Arya's sudden death even more devastating for Camila. When the police first approached Camila, she was visibly distressed. The pain of losing her mother was compounded by the shock of finding her dead. Of course, Camila told the detectives that she had been studying for an upcoming biology exam when she decided to take a break and grab a snack. She went to the kitchen and found her mother on the floor, unresponsive, with a can of Diet Pepsi nearby. In a panic, Camila called 911, hoping with all her might that it wasn't too late. During the interview, Camila was cooperative but deeply emotional. She described her mother's recent mood as happy and content, with no signs of stress or unhappiness. Camila couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm Arya, describing her as someone who was loved by everyone who knew her. The police asked Camila about her relationship with Lorenzo. Her stepfather and Camila spoke highly of him, saying he was a sweetheart and that she saw him as a supportive father figure. She was completely unaware of his secret sexual obsession with hair, a fact that worried the police even more and made them somewhat suspicious as the detectives delved deeper into Camila's life. They found nothing to suggest that she was involved in her mother's death. Alibi checked out. Camila had been in her room absorbing her studies at the time of the murder. Her social media activity showed the typical life of a college student, with posts about school friends, liberal political causes, and upcoming exams. There were no signs of secret relationships or troubling behavior. However, the police remained suspicious of the dynamics within the Elliott household. They wondered if Camila could have been an unwitting pawn in Lorenzo's plan. If Lorenzo's sexual obsession with Camila was as intense as they suspected, it could mean that Camila was also in danger. But for now, there was no evidence linking Camila to the crime, leaving the detectives to focus elsewhere, where the third person the police questioned was Jessica Miller. Arya's closest friend and confidant. Jessica, 45, was a real estate agent who had known Arya for over a decade. The two women had bonded over their shared experiences as working women in Shaker Heights and had become inseparable over the years. Jessica was often seen at Arya's house, helping with community events or simply sharing a glass of wine in the evenings. To those who knew them, their friendship seemed unbreakable, a bond built on trust and mutual respect. However, the police soon discovered that Jessica had been hiding a significant secret despite her apparent loyalty to Arya. Jessica had been having an affair with Lorenzo Elliott. This revelation shocked everyone who knew the trio, especially given the deep friendship between Jessica and Arya. According to Jessica, the affair had started about a year before Arya's death. She claimed it began innocently enough, with Lorenzo coming over to one of Jessica's famous hot tub parties alone. After some flirtation, IOU's banter, things quickly escalated into a full-blown sexual relationship. Jessica admitted to feeling a bit guilty for betraying her friend, but said she couldn't resist Lorenzo, whom she described as hot. When the police interviewed Jessica, she was nervous and defensive. She knew that her affair with Lorenzo placed her under suspicion, but she insisted that she had nothing to do with Arya's death. Jessica claimed to be somewhat sad about Arya's passing and had even considered reducing how often she sexed with Lorenzo because of the guilt she felt. However, she also revealed that Lorenzo had recently told her he was in love with someone else, leaving her devastated. Jessica didn't know who the other woman was, but she suspected it might be someone younger, possibly Camila. The detectives pressed Jessica for more details about her sexual relationship with Lorenzo and her whereabouts on the day of Arya's death. Jessica stated that she had been in a real estate showing in Cleveland Heights and a client who could verify her alibi. The police followed up on this, confirming that Jessica was indeed with clients at the time of the murder. However, they couldn't ignore the possibility that Jessica might have been involved in some way, given her emotional turmoil and jealousy over Lorenzo's shifting affections. Despite her alibi, Jessica remained a person of interest in the investigation, her affair with Lorenzo, along with her close relationship with Arya made her a complicated figure in the case. The police had to consider whether Jessica's jealousy and heartbreak could have driven her to do something drastic, but without concrete evidence linking her to the crime, Jessica was left in a precarious position, caught between her guilt over the affair and her sadness over the loss of her friend. On April 27, 2019, shortly after 9 a.m., the weather in Shaker Heights was cool and cloudy, typical of an Ohio spring. As the investigators continued searching for clues, they received a significant breakthrough in the case. A toxicology report came back from the lab, revealing that the cause of Arya Elliott's death was cyanide poisoning. The lethal substance had been mixed into her can of Diet Pepsi, confirming that her death was not a natural occurrence, but a deliberate act of murder. The revelation of cyanide as the murder weapon shocked the investigative team. Cyanide is a rare and deadly poison often associated with high-profile espionage cases. The detectives knew they were dealing with a premeditated crime. Someone had gone to great lengths to plan and execute Arya's murder. This new evidence shifted the focus of the investigation, giving the police a clear direction. The detectives immediately revisited the crime scene, looking for any trace of the poison or clues about how it might have been introduced into Arya's drink. They examined the Diet Pepsi can, the surrounding area in the kitchen, and any containers or objects that might have come into contact with the poison. Forensic experts were called in to analyze everything from the remnants of the drink to fingerprints on the can. Although no direct trace of cyanide was found in the kitchen, the forensic team did find traces of the poison on the rim of the can, confirming that it had been deliberately tampered with. But this discovery raised more questions. Who had access to the poison, and how did they introduce it into Arya's drink? Without her noticing, the police began delving into the backgrounds of all the suspects, looking for any history of chemical knowledge or access to dangerous substances. They also examined recent purchases and online searches that might indicate someone had been researching or acquiring cyanide. The detectives knew that cyanide wasn't something one could easily obtain. Whoever used it had likely done some serious planning. This new evidence also put pressure on the suspects. The police re-interviewed them, focusing on their knowledge of poisons and any suspicious behavior leading up to Arya's death. The detectives were determined to uncover who had the means and motive to commit such a calculable crime, with the case now definitively pointing to murder. The investigation took on a new urgency as they closed in on the truth. On April 20, 2019, just before noon, the police made a breakthrough in the investigation that would lead them directly to the killer. After carefully examining the evidence and re-interviewing the suspects, the detectives began to piece together a disturbing picture. All signs pointed to Lorenzo Elliott, Arya's husband, as Theon, responsible for her death. Lorenzo Elliott, 32 years old, was a charming and successful man who worked at a health insurance company. He seemingly had it all: a stable job, a beautiful wife, and a perfect life in the progressive utopia of Shaker Heights. However, beneath the surface, Lorenzo was a man driven by dark and twisted sexual desires. He had developed a sexual obsession with Camila Elliott, Arya's daughter. From her previous marriage, Lorenzo had secretly harbored sexual feelings for Camila, who was only 19 years old, and unaware of his intentions. As his obsession grew, Lorenzo became increasingly distant from Arya, seeing her as an obstacle to his disturbing fantasy of starting a new life with Camila as his wife. The detectives uncovered key evidence linking Lorenzo to the crime. An analysis of his internet search history revealed that he had been researching cyanide for several months. Before Arya's death, he had searched for information on where to buy it, how to use it, and its effects on the human body. This incriminating evidence suggested that Lorenzo had carefully planned the murder, intending to use cyanide to get rid of Arya without leaving a trace. On the day of the murder, Lorenzo took advantage of Arya's daily routine. He knew she loved Diet Pepsi and drank a can every day after work. According to the investigation, Lorenzo had mixed cyanide into Arya's kind of Diet Pepsi, knowing she would drink it as soon as she got home. The poison acted quickly, causing Arya to collapse and die. Within minutes, Lorenzo's plan was to make it look like a sudden heart attack, but the toxicology report revealed the truth. The police confronted Lorenzo with the evidence they had gathered. At first, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as the detectives presented the facts, his internet searches, his growing obsession with Camila, and the traces of cyanide on the can, Lorenzo's facade began to crumble. Lorenzo's arrest shocked the Shaker Heights community. Aria's friends and neighbors were horrified to discover that the man they had once considered a devoted husband had committed such a heinous act. Camila was devastated by the revelation, struggling to accept that the man she had viewed as a father figure had been secretly plotting against her. Mother Lorenzo Elliott's trial began on January 15, 2019 at the Kyobe County Court of Common Police. The case attracted significant media attention, with local news channels extensively covering the proceedings. Aria Elliott's murder had shocked the Shaker Heights community, and many were eager to see justice served. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Leakey, 45, was known for his meticulous and determined approach to criminal cases. Leakey presented a solid case against Lorenzo Elliott. He argued that Lorenzo had planned Aria's murder with premeditation, pointing to the evidence of cyanide found in Aria's Diet Pepsi and Lorenzo's extensive internet searches on the poison. Leakey described Lorenzo's actions as cold and calculated, emphasizing how Lorenzo's obsession with Camila Elliott had driven him to commit the crime. On the other hand, Lorenzo's defense attorney, Laura Phillips, 38, tried to paint a different picture. Phillips argued that Lorenzo was a man overwhelmed by personal problems and stress, which might have affected his judgment. She claimed that Lorenzo's actions were not premeditated, but rather the result of mental instability. Phillips attempted to argue that there was not enough direct evidence linking Lorenzo to the poison, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. During the trial, Aria's family, including Camila, attended every day, visibly emotional and distressed. Camila was particularly affected by the trial, having to confront the reality of her stepfather's betrayal and her mother's death. The court heard emotional testimonies from Aria's friends and colleagues who described her as a loving and caring person who could never have imagined such a violent end. After several days of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict on January 22, 2019. Lorenzo Elliott was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Lorenzo to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with a mixture of relief and sadness by Aria's family and friends. They felt that while justice had been served, the pain of losing Aria and Lorenzo's betrayal would endure. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the case, but left a lasting impact on those involved. Aria's friends and family had to come to terms with the aftermath of the trial, trying to rebuild their lives. While remembering the warmth and kindness Aria had brought into their lives, the trial served as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most seemingly perfect facades. After the trial and Lorenzo Elliott's conviction, life in Shaker Heights began to return to normal. But the impact of the case was deeply felt. By those involved, the Elliott family was forever changed, and the community was left dealing with the fallout of the crime. Lorenzo Elliott was transferred to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, where he began serving his life sentence. His trial had been highly publicized, and he became a known figure in the prison system. His incarceration was a stark contrast to the life of luxury he had once enjoyed. The media coverage of his case continued for a time, with many local outlets reporting on his adjustment to prison life and his interactions with other inmates. Camila Elliott, Aria's daughter, faced a difficult road ahead. She was a pre-med student at the time of her mother's death and had been deeply affected by the murder. After the trial, Camila took a break from school to focus on her mental health and processed the trauma of the past few months. She received support from friends, family, and professional counselors. Her community rallied around her, and many people admired her resilience and strength during such a difficult time. Jessica Miller, Aria's former friend and Lorenzo's secret lover, also had to navigate the consequences of the case. Although she was exonerated of any involvement in the murder, the affair and her role in Lorenzo's life made her a controversial figure. Jessica's real estate business suffered due to the negative publicity. She decided to move to another city to start over, hoping to leave the past behind and rebuild her career and personal life. Over time, Aria's friends and family worked to find a sense of normalcy. They focused on remembering her positively and continuing. The community work she had been passionate about the case served as a harsh reminder of how quickly life can be upended by betrayal and violence, leaving lasting scars on everyone involved. As time passed, the shockwaves of Arya Elliott's murder began to subside, but the scars it left behind were permanent. Shaker Heights, known for its close-knit community and peaceful atmosphere, Faye was forever marked by the tragic events that had unfolded within its borders. Arya's friends and family gradually returned to their daily routines, but the void she left behind was impossible to fill. Those who knew her continued to honor her memory by participating in the activities and causes she had loved. Arya had been deeply involved in local charity work, and in her memory, the community established the Arya Elliott Foundation, dedicated to supporting underprivileged children and families. In the area, the foundation quickly became a symbol of Arya's enduring legacy, a way for her spirit to continue influencing and uplifting those around her. For Camilla Elliott, moving forward was a slow and painful process. The trauma of losing her mother so suddenly and learning of her stepfather's dark intentions had left her emotionally scarred. Although she had taken a break from her pre-med studies, Camilla eventually returned to Case Western Reserve University with a goal of fulfilling her mother's dream for her to become a doctor. The journey was not easy, but with the support of her friends, family, and community, Camilla found the strength to persevere. She often spoke at local events about her experiences advocating for mental health awareness and the importance of seeking help in times of need. Lorenzo Elliott, once a respected member of the Shaker Heights community, faded into obscurity as he served his life sentence. His once promising career and bright future had been reduced to a series of bleak days behind bars. History, which had captivated the public's attention during the trial, eventually became just another tragic tale of a life gone wrong in prison. Lorenzo's days were monotonous and filled with regret. His actions had not only destroyed his life, but it also caused irreparable damage to the people he had claimed to love. Jessica Miller's decision to leave Shaker Heights and start anew was both a blessing and a curse. While she was blue to escape the gossip and judgment that had surrounded her after the affair and trial, she also had to come to terms with her own role in the tragic events. Moving to a new city gave Jessica the opportunity to rebuild her life, but she often struggled with feelings of guilt and shame. She threw herself into her work, hoping that by succeeding in her career, she could somehow atone for her past mistakes. Despite the distance and the passage of time, the bond between Jessica and Camilla remained strong.